Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of a brand new series. If you don't know me, my name is Sarah. I am a children's pastor in Southern California, and I've worked in ministry for over 20 years. And I was raised in the church. Somewhere in my teen years, I found myself questioning some things. The question that I was asking was, if Jesus was Jewish and we are his followers, then why aren't we celebrating and doing things that Jewish people do? I understood the concept that we were called Christians because we are Christ followers. There is a major difference there between us and Jews who are still waiting for the Messiah. We believe that the Messiah has come in the form of Jesus. So I understood why we weren't Jewish anymore. We are Christians. But why was it that we didn't keep the kosher laws? There was also the question of these holidays, these holy days, and why were there holy days that the Jews celebrated that we as Christians did not, even though we read in the New Testament Jesus celebrating these holy days. Over the years, I have been asked many times, why is it that as a Christian, I acknowledge the Jewish holidays? And the simplest answer is because every single one of them points to Jesus. They either point to his first coming or they point to his second coming. Personally, I think this is something that most modern churches are missing. They're missing out on what can be learned, what can be gained from spending time celebrating, acknowledging, honoring these holy days. Passover was just a couple of weeks ago, which is followed immediately by the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we're going to start there. Also, I just want to say, I think that Passover is one of the easiest, most obvious connections that we can see of how this ancient Jewish holy day points to Jesus. First, though, we have to go back in the Old Testament. We can read about the holy days in Leviticus in chapter 23. They're all listed out. They each get a little paragraph, and they're going to tell you when are they celebrated and what you do, which in this case for the Old Testament, it really has to do with what offerings you give and how often you give them. But for Passover, really, if we're going to understand it, we have to go back to the book of Exodus. That is where the first Passover took place. As we read about Moses and how God used him to free his people from slavery in Egypt, we come to the 10 plagues of Egypt. But the final plague, which is listed in chapter 11 of Exodus, which is the plague for the death of the firstborn. And Passover was instituted that night when God instructed Moses to tell all of the Israelites to take a lamb and to place its blood on the doorpost and the lintels, and that when the angel of death came for the firstborn of Egypt, every house that had the blood would be passed over. So what does that have to do with Jesus? Jesus's Last Supper that he celebrated with his disciples was a Passover meal. And we can read about that in all four Gospels. Specifically, you can find it in Matthew chapter 26, Mark 14, Luke 22, and John beginning in chapter 13. If you have the inclination or ever have the opportunity to experience a Jewish Passover Seder, which is the special name for the feast that they have for Passover, I highly recommend it. It is a beautiful celebration, and we as Christians should be able to connect with that, because even that story of Moses and what God did as he freed his people from slavery in Egypt, that's still part of our story as believers. We have that as our spiritual inheritance as believers in Jesus. But more than that, again, connecting with the fact that Jesus's Last Supper was a Passover meal, and that he was taking those elements and everything that they knew about the Passover meal and giving it brand new meaning as he connected it to himself. You had done this tradition in one way, with it having one meaning your entire life, and now he comes in and says that there is a new meaning, that there is a new understanding. He didn't, as he says, He didn't come to abolish the law and the prophets. He came to fulfill them. It's not that he is destroying the original meaning of the Passover. He is simply giving more meaning by adding on to it. That this wasn't just God rescuing his people from physical slavery here on earth, but he sent his son to rescue us from slavery to sin. That Jesus himself is our Passover lamb who shed his blood to save us. Just as the Passover lambs that night, their blood was shed to mark the doorposts and lintels to save the people of Israel. There are so many connections. If I was going to talk about everything, it would take the length of a Seder meal, and that is several hours, and I'm not going to do that to us today. But if you're interested in learning more, I want to tell you that there are messianic books out there, meaning there are books out there that can tell you how do you celebrate a Passover meal that acknowledges and celebrates Jesus Christ. And if you are curious, if you want to search for it, what keywords that I would use would be messianic Seder or messianic Haggadah. Paul refers to Jesus as our Passover lamb in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. The book of Hebrews has some great chapters that refer to Jesus as our high priest, helping us to understand how he fulfilled the sacrificial system. And we can read in Revelation of Jesus being seen in the form of a lamb who was slain. This is not a concept that I have made up. This is not a concept that is new. However, it is a concept that I'm realizing is not commonly known among Christians. But if you take the time, the connections are there. They are not hidden. They are not mysterious. They are fascinating and they are beautiful. You just have to take the time to understand the beginning. It's important that we spend time understanding the Old Testament so that we can have the proper context for understanding the New Testament. It is important to understand the context of the holy days in their original institution so we can understand how Jesus has fulfilled them. Of the ancient Jewish holy days, honestly, Passover is probably my favorite, and it is probably the one that I have spent the most time exploring and understanding in my journey of better understanding the Word of God. I'll be back when there are more holidays coming up in the calendar so we can discuss those. And in the meantime, I would encourage you to do your own research. Read these passages in the Bible that I've just discussed with you. Go back to Leviticus, dive into Hebrews, spend some time in Revelation, First Corinthians, the Gospels. And if you want to understand those connections, then you have to spend time in all of that. And if you want to understand the roots of our faith so that you can better understand our faith, then you have to spend time in all of it.